Welcome to the Healers Café, the #1 show for medical practitioners and holistic healers to have heart-to-heart conversations about their day-to-day lives while sharing their expertise for improving your health and wellness. So welcome to the Healers Café. And today I have with me Rhonda Nelson, and she serves on the executive board of directors with the Asthma and Allergy Network. She impacts legislation and speaks nationally, raising awareness of AERD. Now, AERD is aspirin exacerbated respiratory disease. And herself, for more than 20 years, has experienced many of these symptoms, but also many misdiagnoses and a near fatal struggle to find relief, with a desperate search for answers and a constant journey to access proper support. So I think I'll leave it with that. That kind of sums up part of the journey you've gone through. And yeah, well, thank you very much for speaking about this important and often misdiagnosed condition.
Yes, thank
So,
you.
so where shall we start? Maybe explaining what it is and then how it was maybe for you, how you came to realize it. Because sometimes what it is and how it happens isn't quite the same story. So,
Absolutely. Um, so like you said, AERD is aspirin exacerbated respiratory disease. And so for me, I thought that I had a cold. Um, and it was the cold that never went away. And I'm going back to 2000, I believe. And so um, just after several months of runny eyes, somewhat struggling to catch my breath, um, a constant congested nose, um, no relief at all. So you just start to search, right? Because at that point, AERD was known as Samter's triad, and it was not very well known at all. Um, and as in my case, which is very typical, many times you'll go to an a doctor that will treat allergies, and they'll say, well, you just have allergies, and they'll do all the tests, and maybe one or two things come back, maybe it doesn't. In my case, it wasn't that I was really allergic to a lot of things, but we still the sublingual drops that I used made my symptoms worse.
let's see.
So then we went to an ENT who saw that I had nasal polyps. And so I had those removed. And once those were removed, I got a very short window of some relief. Now, we still didn't understand the connection with aspirin and NSAIDs. So if you take an aspirin for a body ache, or in my case, I was taking Tylenol PM, which, by the way, some AERD patients can tolerate Tylenol. I happen to be one of those, however, not Tylenol PM. And so I would take this and I would go into these horrific asthmatic attacks, where literally my throat was closing, rush to the ER. I would go into hotel rooms because we traveled a lot, and if there was mold in the air systems, that would set it off. So now we're back to, well, what is this? And it just so happened that we moved to North Carolina, and I found an allergist there. And he immediately said to me, as I was describing this whole journey, he said, you don't have allergies. You have Samter's triad or AERD. And he said, I've just spent a week at a conference in Denver about this very disease, and we're learning more and more about it. So sure enough, that is exactly what I had. But that took a little over 2 years to get a diagnosis, and it was a struggle. It was a struggle because I would have an asthmatic attack, and I mean, you talk about severe. I was in the emergency room many times because you're not prepared with the tools you need to deal with that, right? Because you don't have a diagnosis. And I'd never had asthma as a child. This literally came out of nowhere.
And so, I mean, it's not extremely known still at this point,
No, it's not.
which is, it's kind of shocking because it's not that rare
Right.
from what I understand,
Yes.
so.
And if you look at the components, it's
Mhm,
not like the components are anything that are just over the top bizarre or different or whatever. We have an
mhm,
asthma component, we have a nasal polyp component, and then we do have, which is the most complex of the three components, is the aspirin sensitivity and NSAID sensitivity. So
mhm,
overall, you would think that if
mhm.
a patient presents with 2 out of 3, that possibly they would have the third, and that they would do an aspirin challenge to see. But it is still very often misdiagnosed, which
Mhm.
is disheartening to me, because if you don't have the tools necessary to treat it, life can
Mhm.
be pretty miserable. And
Yeah,
I have to say, there's AERD patients that also have common allergies. So now they've got the
right.
two things fighting together, where and their ENT or their allergist may be treating their allergies, whether it's dust mites or ragweed or whatever those common allergies are, but they're not treating the AERD, so they're still not getting any relief. And you've
Yeah.
got these two things fighting, so it can be very challenging.
Mhm. Yeah, and like you say, if you're not prepared, it's always a risk
Yeah,
to life, right? Because
yeah,
yeah, you may not make it to the hospital on time, so.
yeah.
And it's not common that they give you aids that you can use for yourself, even
Right.
in asthma, without a prescription, and then you need a diagnosis. So
Correct.
it's a bit of a complicated vicious circle.
Yeah.
So what have you done for yourself to well, to improve from the situation, first of all, and is it a reversible situation?
So let me answer that question first. No, it's not. There is no cure.
Mm.
Um, and so, I've gone down a really long path. The first band-aid that they like to throw at it is steroids. And prednisone, and we know what that can do. um, and that was my path. I was on a lot of steroids for a very long time. Then now, there are other medications that you can take to be well maintained. um, and I've been down that path as well. And as much as I don't want to be someone that's on a lot of medications, unfortunately, I have not found anything naturally that will keep it as well maintained as being on some of the medications. Now, the good news for me, biologics have come along, and I do take a biologic, and it's allowed me to discontinue quite a few of the other meds. And as we know, a lot of meds have side effects that are not pleasant. And the original meds that I were on was that way. They're very hard on the liver. You have to constantly monitor your liver enzymes. Then fast forward to
Yeah.
the biologics, those have their own side effects. Um, so I took it upon myself to go down another path to see what would help me in conjunction with the biologic and with the possibility of, if I never could completely discontinue the biologic, I would at least be able to stretch the treatments out. And so I went down a path of some more natural supplements and modalities that have really worked for me. Now, I don't say they will always work for everybody. I don't proclaim that they're a cure, because there is not a cure. These are all things that I do to make my day-to-day life more comfortable, for the disease to be well maintained, and again, to stretch some of my treatments out so that I'm not taking as much medicine as I once was.
So what has helped you, even though you're not prescribing, obviously? So,
Right.
and
Well,
everyone.
one of the things that is very well known, and a lot of patients talk about this, a lot of the resources that are out there for AERD, um, a diet that's high omega-3, low in omega-6, because that can help reduce inflammation within the body.
Makes sense.
I think our typical Western diets are they have a relatively high omega-6 to 3 ratio. So if you try to reverse that around and do high omega-3s, low omega-6s, those will, uh, that will should reduce, I should say, some of the inflammation within your body. And I can tell you just simple things that, if I eat things that I know are very high inflammatory foods, I can tell it just in the way you feel it in your joints, you feel it in your hands and your knees. So, but if we follow the Western diet of the high 6 to 3 with that high ratio, it can eliminate and create deficiencies in EPA and DHA. So I supplement with a lot of supplements, histamine blockers, things like that. I also, as much as we've over the years been taught exercise, 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 it truly does help to keep things moving and keep that inflammation down in your body. And I don't believe that I don't believe anyone has to be in a gym for 1, 2, 3, 4 hours a day. Like I have a routine that I do about 30 minutes, 20 minutes of 20 minutes of exercise. I use a rebounder. I have an infrared sauna, which is huge. I also have a swim spa, so I swim. Anything, walking, do a 30-minute walk, anything to keep your body moving inside will help reduce that inflammation. And then the other thing that I've really come to rely on is red light therapy. And I think the more that we study the red light therapy, we realize how important it can be in someone whose body is full of inflammation.
So what do you know, or have you heard of the mechanisms why aspirin would trigger such a cascade? We know it causes hemorrhage in the stomach. It's one of the biggest causes of death by bleeding. But
Yes.
What is the mechanism or the
It
told
has to
mechanisms?
do, and now we're getting into a part that it's a very scientific part that I am not great at explaining, but it has to do with the leukotrienes within your body and that kind
Okay.
of production. And so, I think the big question is, for me, why does or why would aspirin create this reaction in one person and
Mhm,
not
mhm.
in another? And if we go back and we think about, we've been told for years to take a baby aspirin for cardio
Right.
health, right?
Mhm,
Um, so that to me is still like the magical question that I would love to have answered. Like, why
mhm,
does this happen in people, especially when we're a society that uses aspirin a lot, or NSAIDs. I mean,
mhm.
we use them a lot.
Right.
Um, Good or bad, it's a fact, right? And
Mhm.
so I don't know. I can't really scientifically answer that question. I
Yeah.
just know that it is a chemical imbalance that then causes an overproduction of leukotrienes and all of these other
Mhm.
issues with your cells, and that then it creates um, the
Well,
response.
yeah, I wonder if it's in people that have a tendency to, to have a greater inflammatory response,
Hmm.
because it's it's also the receptor, the
Yes.
environment that is hit by a thing,
Yeah.
because which is probably why it's hard to take it off the market saying, hey, it causes this harm,
Right.
you know, because they can always say, well, it apparently, though that needs to be proven, but that it can do good for this or that reason,
Hmm.
right? You
Right.
know, yeah, so so there is that susceptibility, which would seem like a factor, but
Hmm.
is that dietary then? Is it, you know, is it people that have tended to be high inflammatory to start with,
Right.
or not? I mean, that would be another
Well,
question seen
it's
in
interesting that
Europe,
you say that,
everywhere.
because
You know,
yeah, because I feel like statistically it's not common in children.
right?
So then
Okay.
that would bring me to exactly your point that you just made. Is it connected to people who, to diet, where people have ingested high inflammatory diets throughout a period of their life? Um, could be, or is it connected to, there are no studies out there that I know of that I've found where we see that a percentage of AERD patients have other, like, autoimmune or
Right.
inflammatory issues. Um,
Mm-hmm.
when you do a deep dive on AERD, you kind of come across the same kinds of studies.
What would your life be like if you were pain-free? If you were one of the millions who suffer from chronic pain, the thought of just one day without it may seem impossible. This is often because conventional medicine tends to fall short in the treatment of pain, opting to prescribe pills or recommend surgery rather than getting to the root cause of the problem. But if you are suffering with emotional or physical pain, there is hope. Join the founder and CEO of Bowen College, Manon Bolliger, live online for Your Body Mind Reboot. Learn how to listen to your symptoms and get to the root cause of your pain. Plus, be trained in basic Bowen therapy moves so that you can reboot your body for optimal health. You don't have to live in pain. You can heal. Stop the pain pill cycle by visiting www.yourbodymindreboot.com to learn more and to register.
And it's like it doesn't go any farther than that. And then
Mm-hmm.
for me, I'm like, well, why do we not have a link? Like, if
Mm-hmm.
a person has XYZ uh autoimmune disease, are they more susceptible to
Right.
AERD? But
Mm-hmm.
that research is just not heavily there right now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
um, and
Yeah. Well.
I
Yeah.
think too, we hear a lot about diseases like Lyme and
Mm-hmm.
all and POTS and all this other stuff. And and those are really in the forefront right now. And I don't know why AERD at this point isn't, because two of the components, like I said before, are very common: asthma and nasal polyps.
Mhm, mhm,
So it's a bit of a mystery to me, a
mhm.
frustrating mystery, why it's not a
Yeah,
little
for
more
sure.
common. Yeah.
Yeah, and then there's the whole environmental bit. Is it the location where either by, geoengineering or more spraying or more glycophosphates or more something,
Hmm.
that it changes the foods that are available for people
Correct.
that may lack a mineral or that, so I mean, it could be and that's the thing is there's no research there because there's no interest by some of these pharmaceuticals to improve their product, right?
Right.
It's, so
And
it's
what's interesting is some of the pharmaceuticals that are making aspirin and NSAIDs are also the ones making the biologics. So, or the
well,
other drugs that we take for this disease. So
yes.
one is, quite frankly, poisoning you, and one is poisoning you in a different way to control the first one. So it is, but even something as simple, I mean, we certainly know how simple drinking water can vary from
Mm,
one area of the country to another. And, is
absolutely.
there something that we've ingested in that way that has created this perfect storm within our bodies? So
Mhm.
it is frustrating because as a patient, I don't feel like there's still a lot of research.
No.
And I feel through the forums that I'm on and the people that I interact with, other patients, they're kind of some of them are just really at their wits' end with it because I mean, knock on wood, I am extremely lucky. I feel like my symptoms are extremely well controlled.
Mhm.
And but I hear from people in the UK, they don't have the same access to some of the medications that we do. um I could get on a whole nother bandwagon about the situation with insurance and
Yep.
what it will and won't
Cover.
cover,
Yep. Mhm.
you know and when we had talked about a little bit earlier some of the uh, less common modalities that I use. The other thing that I use a lot is chiropractic and also acupuncture.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I will tell you, I've said this many, many times. I don't understand why these modalities aren't covered under our insurance because these are being proactive to keep me out of the emergency room. And a patient can spend thousands and thousands. I do every year because none of that is covered under insurance.
Mhm.
And so that's a whole nother, like I
Yeah.
said, that's a whole nother box to open up.
But I think, what you're bringing up is very important because it's like the microcosm of a much bigger re-questioning of everything. We see in a parallel way that, Pfizer, for example, was very linked to causing myocarditis, and then they have the drug to so-called solve myocarditis, so it's like, so create the problem and the solution in the same market, and it's a tight small pharmaceutical market, and then you basically work in a system that doesn't allow dissent or opinions that are contrary to the narrative, and everyone's paid off one way or another. I'm
Yep.
simplifying it, but I mean, it's kind of the same parallel. And if you look into Lyme's disease, it's the same story.
Right.
It's also complicated. All of them are, but they all share in common that we don't have independent for the people boards that can research and actually get answers because they're all sponsored pharmaceuticals. So we're
Correct.
sort of in this circle where we're not going to find the answers in the system that created the problem in the first place. It's almost like
And
we need to strengthen our bodies and, create the research and all of that from a non-financial perspective, which is very challenging in a world
very,
run by
yeah,
money.
yeah.
So,
And it's exactly the thing. The the companies, the pharmaceuticals that are creating the issue they hold the key to anything that can somewhat make it manageable, right? But they don't want to share in any kind of research, because if they cut those two things off, then they're losing money hand over fist. So it really is sad. I believe it kind of goes farther than that too. I mean, even something as simple as the food we eat. Let's take chicken. And we look at a chicken
mhm,
farm and we look at what they're injecting into the chicken or spraying on the feed, et cetera, et cetera. And then we go and ingest that. I mean, there's no wonder our bodies are in these perfect storms because of this vicious cycle that we're in. And it's really heartbreaking. And quite honestly, I feel for the younger generations that are coming up in
mhm,
today, because I think
yeah.
at least mine and your generation and those before us, we knew the value of homegrown foods, and we knew the
Mhm,
value of not injecting things in the foods to make them last longer. And we didn't I mean, my parents had a garden. My mom canned, and we ate fresh vegetables and all of that. And that's just not, I think we are seeing people getting back to that because they see what is
yeah.
happening, but it's nowhere near
Mhm.
the massive amount that can solve problems right now. You know, you've got families or communities doing these things, but this is a big world. It's a big country. Um,
Mhm.
so I don't know. I don't know.
But it's little by little, right? At
Yes.
least it's, supporting the farmers, realizing that their struggle is part of the bigger picture as well, right? Like,
Right.
trying to do the land grabs that are happening everywhere and, put the farmers out of the possibility financially to keep their farms. It's all connected. I think it's
Yeah.
time that we look at the big picture and go, whoa, you
Yeah.
know, we are sovereign human beings. Who are these people that think they can run us
Right. I also think it's really interesting. Uh-oh, did we freeze up?
this way, and ask questions. I think it's an exciting time.
And
Yeah.
I think I find it interesting that, um, especially around here where I live, there are weekly multiple farmers markets.
Mhm.
And I love seeing how crowded they are,
Mm.
um, on each market day, because that says to me that people are opening their eyes. They're realizing that I say this without a doubt. The food that we intake is our health is directly related to that because so much of the food has been manipulated.
Mhm.
And so it excites me to see families opening their eyes to this and going back to the natural things that we know are good and healthy. And it also excites me because it means there's starting to be a pushback against the big corporations and the big pharmas and all of these, and we're leaning in to the small business people, and
Mm.
that to me is what America is.
Yeah.
And so I don't know, I don't want to get off on a I don't want to get off on a tangent, but
It's all related. That's the
it
thing.
is.
And I think you know, by not relating it, we do sort of a disservice at this moment of awakening. I think
Yeah.
people are seeing that it is related. And so not to speak to it is kind of, we used to say, you are what you eat. Well, it's still
Yes.
true. you
Yeah,
know? Yeah.
absolutely. I believe it is 100%. And and again, I the path that I chose and still adhere to with my AERD is I really lean into a lot of these therapies that aren't conventional, that aren't covered by insurance. And I know without a doubt these therapies have made a world of difference in my uh, management of the disease. And so, I feel so fortunate and so blessed that I'm able to do this. But what I don't like is when I hear people say, I can't even afford the medication that they're trying to give me for the disease, much less go
Yeah.
do something that's not covered in some way. And
Mhm.
so, I don't know, and I don't know if in my lifetime any of that will ever change. It is such a big, um, to me, it's a big game. It's a chess game almost of how things would have to change. And
Mhm.
will we see that? I don't know. But I do know that if people don't start opening their eyes more to this, it's going to get worse instead of better.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
it'll be where they'll just be, forcing you'll be forced to take all these drugs because there's nothing else to do to treat a disease
Mhm.
that you might have. But I think we've all heard, and there's so many people out there. One comes to mind. Her name is Danielle Walker. She does Against the Grain. She's got
Mhm.
and she literally healed herself to a point of having an amazing quality of life from her diseases with the food. And she's now created these cookbooks, and they're just amazing. And they're not hard. It's simple, easy foods. We
Mhm.
don't have to put all these other additives into those foods.
Yeah.
So there are those stories out there that are absolutely success stories with a simple.
There's a, I think we're in accelerated time.
I'm sorry, you cut out on that one.
Yeah, no, I was just saying, I think it cut out again. But yeah, I do think we're in an accelerated time where things are becoming more clear to people, and people need to stand up and make decisions that are right, for
Yeah.
themselves, their family, and ultimately, their country, the universe. You can go quite,
Yeah.
you know. But yeah, no, we're in an exciting time. So I think, these discussions to me always make me happy, because they're bigger, they're getting at the
Mhm.
problem, and
Yeah.
we are the answer. That's
Yeah.
the thing. What we do individually and what we show as an example, and who we buy from and who we support are
Yeah.
voting. Those are voting dollars, right? And so
Absolutely.
I think that those are little ways in which change happens in big ways. you
Yeah.
know
And I always like to say too, even if I'm only making a change for myself, my family, and maybe a handful of friends, at least
Mhm.
it's made a difference,
Yes.
right?
Mhm.
And so then maybe those people employ on others the importance of looking at these things and deciding what is right for you and your body, not being told what is supposedly right for your body. And
Okay.
and so you got to take baby steps before you can walk and run.
Yep.
That's
Definitely. Well,
that's kind of the way it is.
Rhonda, thank you so much for sharing. Our time's already up. It's crazy. It was so fast.
Thank you. It was so great to talk to you.
And thank you for sharing. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you for joining us at the Healers Café. If you haven't already done so, please like, comment, and subscribe with notifications on, as I post a new podcast every Wednesday with tons of useful information and tips for natural healing that you won't want to miss.